Hello and welcome to another video. Today we'll be taking a look at the Decembrist Revolt in 1825. We'll take a look at the historical context, causes of the revolt, some key figures, societies involved, also the events leading to the revolt itself, the outcome, the consequences, the historical significance, and the cultural impact. Now, let's start with the historical context. So, we have to think of the post-Napoleonic Russia. Following the Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815, Russian officers were exposed to liberal ideas in Europe. Many sought similar reforms in Russia. But at the same time, Alexander was still the Tsar. Initially, Tsar Alexander I adopted liberal reforms, but later reverted to conservative policies, leading to disillusionment among progressives. Some books that highlight this are Alexander I, the Tsar who defeated Napoleon by Marie-Pierre Rey explores Alexander's complex policies. A quote I have here is, "The initial liberalism of Alexander's reign gave way to repression, leaving a legacy of broken promises and thwarted hopes." This was said by Marie-Pierre Rey in this book. Now let's take a look at the causes of the revolt. Well, first of all, we have a desire for constitutional reform. Exposure to Western European political systems fostered desires for a constitutional monarchy or republic in Russia. Additionally, there was opposition to autocracy. Many were frustrated with the autocratic rule and the lack of political freedoms under the Tsar. And there was a social inequality. The rigid social hierarchy and pervasive serfdom fueled discontent. There's a book on this actually. It's called Russia Under the Old Regime. It's written by Richard Pipes, who details the socio-political structure leading up to the revolt. The quote is, "Serfdom and the autocratic regime were twin pillars of Russian oppression, creating a fertile ground for revolutionary ideas." Now let's take a look at some key figures. Well, first of all, we have Pavel Pestel. He was the leader of the Southern Society who advocated for a republic and the abolition of serfdom. Another person was Nikolai Muravyov. He was a member of the Northern Society who favored a constitutional monarchy with federalism. Of course, we have Tsar Nikolaus I. He ascended the throne following Alexander I's death, dealing with the revolt early in his reign. The book here is The Decembrist Myth in Russian Culture by Lyudmila Parts, who discusses the figures involved and their impact on Russian culture. A quote, "Pestel's radical ideas and Muravyov's moderate stance represent the spectrum of revolutionary thought in the Decembrist movement." Now the societies who were involved. Well, of course, the Northern Society, which was based in St. Petersburg, who composed mainly of liberal nobles and sought moderate reforms. Opposing to that, we have the Southern Society based in Ukraine, who was more radical, advocating for a republic and land redistribution. There's actually also a book on this called Revolutionary Dreams, Utopian Vision and Experimental Life in the Russian Revolution by Richard Stites, who covers the aspirations of various revolutionary groups. In this book he says, "The Northern Society's constitutional aspirations contrasted sharply with the Southern Society's radical republicanism." Now let's take a look at the events leading to the revolt. Well, of course, there was uncertainty of succession. Alexander I's death led to confusion between Konstantin Pavlovich and Nikolaus I. On December 14th, 1825, the Northern Society's plan to prevent Nicholas from taking the throne culminated in the assembly of troops in Senate Square in St. Petersburg. The book highlighting this is The Russian Empire and the World, 1700 to 1917. The Geopolitics, Expansion and Containment by John P. Le Don, who provides context on the succession crisis. A quote of his is, "The death of Alexander I left a vacuum that the Decembrists sought to exploit, hoping to institute profound political change." Now let's take a look at the actual revolt. Well, in Senate Square, about 3,000 soldiers and several officers gathered to protest Nicolaus I's assumption of the throne, demanding constitutional reform. What was Nicolaus I's response? Well, he sent loyal forces, including artillery, who dispersed the demonstrators, resulting in the death or capture of many insurgents. There is also a book on this called Imperial Russia 1801 to 1905 by Tim Chapman. He examines the details of the revolt and its suppression. A quote, "Nicolaus I's swift and brutal suppression of the Decembrists demonstrated the regime's commitment to maintaining autocratic control." The outcomes of the revolt. Well, it failed. The revolt was quickly suppressed due to poor organization and lack of widespread support. There were also a lot of arrests and trials. Approximately 120 people were arrested, with 5 leaders executed and many others exiled to Siberia. There's also a book, of course, Rebellion in Russia, an annotated bibliography by Paul Average, which offers a detailed account of the aftermath and repression. The consequences. Well, there was increased repression. Nicolaus I enacted stricter censorship and surveillance to prevent future insurrections. There was also a legacy of reform movements. The Decembrist Revolt inspired later revolutionary movements and became a symbol of the struggle for political freedom in Russia. The historical significance. Well, the early push to reform was of course significant. It marked one of the first organized attempts to challenge autocratic style in Russia. Autocratic rule in Russia. Influence on Russian thought, of course. The ideas of the Decembrists influenced subsequent generations of Russian revolutionaries and intellectuals. There's a book, of course, The Soviet Experiment, Russia, the USSR, and the Successor States by Ronald Grigor Suni, which explores the long-term effects on Russian revolutionary thought. A quote of his, "The Decembrist Revolt set the precedent for the revolutionary fervor 1917 revolution." Last up is the cultural impact. Well, there are some myths and memories, of course. The Decembrists were romanticized in Russian literature and culture, often portrayed as martyrs for the cause of liberty. There was, of course, also some long-term reflection. The revolt is seen as a precursor to later revolutionary activities, such as the 1905 revolution and the 1917 Russian Revolution. The last book is Russian Literature and Empire, Conquests of the Caucasus from Pushkin to Tolstoy by Susan Leighton, who highlights how the Decembrists influenced Russian literature. A quote of hers is, "The Decembrists became cultural icons, their ideals immortalized in literature, and their sacrifices revered as steps towards eventual freedom." Thank you for listening.